What up, my dudes? Today, I would like to impart to you a strange and shocking revelation. It may set the world on fire, it may unclog your toilets, it may send your brain zooming off into untold cosmos. You ready? Zack Snyder's Justice League was pretty good. It was one of the biggest surprises of 2021 for me. Against all the odds and personal expectations I had based on the previous DC Universe films, and indeed my conception of Zack Snyder himself as a filmmaker, I don't usually like his movies, I ended up really enjoying this one, but I couldn't really remember why. So recently, during a Batman movie binge, I decided to revisit it, figure out what it was that drew me in, and finally ruminate a bit on how Snyder's vision for the DC cinematic universe was thwarted and aborted by the bane of filmmakers since time immemorial: idiots in suits at the studio. All of that is to come, but first, let's talk a bit about the film itself and what led up to it. Now, I am on record on multiple occasions as not being a fan of Zack Snyder's DC films. I found Man of Steel to be a pretty miserable experience, shrouded in doom and gloom and product placement, over-reliant on lofty nonsense dialogue and obvious savior imagery, which then coalesced into some of the most punishing, overdone, schlock action I've ever seen in a major motion picture. To say that it was poorly written would be an understatement. The same goes for Batman v Superman, which I think I liked a little bit more just because I have a soft spot for the bats. But it suffered from an equally miserable tone, terrible story structure, that infamous and hilarious Martha moment, and once again, a pretty mind-numbing action finale. But for all their faults, in retrospect, I can appreciate what Snyder was trying to do, creating a more somber counterbalance to the cheeky, lighthearted tone of Marvel. Fast forward a couple years, and Snyder had to abandon post-production on Justice League to deal with the death of his daughter. Heavy stuff, man. And so, in a classless, disrespectful move to both Snyder and his fans, Warner Brothers decided to ruin his movie, bringing in Joss Whedon, the director of Avengers, to reshoot and ultimately re-edit Justice League to play like a Marvel movie. And the result was laughable. For all the problems that I have with Snyder's films, one thing I respect more than anything else in film or in art in general is artistic integrity, and this botched Frankenstein version of Justice League was basically the most cynical thing ever. It felt like exactly what it was, a desperate attempt to clone Marvel's winning formula using footage from a Zack Snyder film. If you hire somebody to make a movie, let them make their movie. It's almost always going to be better than cynically re-editing it to fit what's popular. You would have thought that DC and Warner Brothers would have learned this lesson after sabotaging the vision of another filmmaker, that being David Ayer's Suicide Squad just a year earlier, and that had like the same result. It was terrible because of editing. But greed always wins, it seems, and so this mangled, pathetic film was released in 2017 to the acclaim of nobody. I'll speak on this situation a little more after we talk about the film itself. And yes, 4 years later, we were finally treated to Snyder's rendition of his own movie, and it's surprisingly good, even for a hater like me. On this recent rewatch, I decided that the things I liked most about it were actually those elements that I so disliked in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. I think we can adequately condense this into two main points: story structure and tone. For a 4-hour movie about people in black spandex punching aliens, the structure and script were surprisingly good, balancing the plentiful action and rising threat of the alien force with a solidly paced narrative where Batman works to assemble the Justice League. Scenes flow into one another in a logical way, character motivations are set up and ultimately paid off, and while there are some extraneous elements that have little to do with the plot, like whatever this guy is, or the whole post-apocalyptic postscript with evil Superman, I'm willing to give Snyder some leeway here because this is his way of showing us what the trajectory of his universe would have looked like if it hadn't been destroyed. But solid structure will only get you so far if the tone is annoying. And for me, this was the film's biggest win, in stark contrast to Joss Whedon's version, which, like we said, plays like a cheap knockoff of Marvel's light, breezy tone. Snyder's film is much more balanced. It has some funny moments, but they don't go overboard, and serve more as punctuation marks than like a reliance on inappropriate humor at every opportunity. It also isn't nearly as oppressive and dour as the previous entries, instead synthesizing these two elements into a tone that felt appropriately comic booky while still maintaining some weight and gravity. The result is a very watchable film, so watchable in fact that I watched it twice, and wouldn't really mind watching it again someday in the future. Trust me, nobody is more surprised than me. And lest we forget, this movie is 4 hours. That's Return of the King level. So you know what? I gotta give it up for Zack on this occasion. I may not like most of his films, but the end result here, and the way that things played out, makes me a little sad that we'll never see what the future held for this aborted universe. And that, Your Honor, brings us to the ultimate point: the lack of studio morality and disrespect for artistic integrity. This has been a problem ever since the art of film started to turn a profit. A good early example would be the injection of minor studio-mandated elements in films such as Citizen Kane, to Billy Wilder's massively butchered Sherlock Holmes film, and on through history. David Fincher is one of our best directors, bar none, and he almost quit the business because of studio interference during Alien 3. The theatrical release of James Cameron's The Abyss is famously nowhere near as good as the version we have now, just because the studio thought it was too long. We could go on for hours, but you get the point. When a studio cynically dips its grubby fingers into the paint, the invariable result is a product that is worse, because the vision behind it is compromised. And the fact that I'm making this point about Justice League, a film I had no hope for or interest in, and indeed no real faith in its creator, is proof positive that even what seems like an exception ends up defining the rule. And so, thanks to the moral and artistic bankruptcy of studio executives, we have not just the ruin of a single film, but the wasted potential of an entire cinematic universe. Not to mention the utter disrespect for the guy who spent years of his life building it. Just when it was starting to get good, too. What the hell? I can't say I'm sad we won't see any more Jared Leto Joker, who was a pale pretender to a much greater throne, or that lady who pooped in Johnny Depp's bed. She can get out of here with no love lost, but a post-apocalyptic Batman movie? That sounds pretty fun, man. At long last, it is impossible to say if any of this would have been any good. All the movies surrounding it were pretty hopeless, from that god-awful Aquaman movie to the poorly written Wonder Woman sequel, but nevertheless, Zack Snyder's Justice League gives us a taste of what could have been, and acts as a bitter reminder that studios can and will sabotage themselves and the art they produce if they think it will make them an extra dollar. And it never, ever works. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, you can help the channel grow by hitting like and subscribe, and I hope you stick around. We've got some good stuff coming up. Peace, love, and energy cube MacGuffins, and I'll see you in the next one.